This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Let's go, business storytellers. How's everyone doing? Hey, today we want to talk about email marketing rules. And there's always rules for everything. Just finished Chad White's books, not book, but books. One is a little bit smaller than the other one, not by much. So check them out. We're going to talk about what rules do we have to follow? Why do we have to follow them? And how do we decide which rules are actually worth following? Friendly reminder, we are live on Amazon. So everything you see around me, you can purchase, including these sound panels. The fake plant, the Washington Redskins helmet is no longer available, but my microphone, everything around me is for sale on Amazon. So just click down in the links. And if you're not on Amazon, you can search for Christoph Trapp on Amazon to find my storefront. But let's talk about email marketing rules. Which ones do we have to pay attention to? Which ones are voluntary, I guess, or optional? And which ones are the law of the land or lands or sometimes states? Let's talk to the expert on the topic, Chad White. Chad, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Quickest fist bump ever in the history of the Business Storytelling Show. Really appreciate you coming on. We talked, I don't know, it seems like a long time ago about email marketing rules. Excuse me. And, you keep updating these books. Doesn't seem like they keep getting any shorter. There's more and more rules. But tell us about, why is it important to be aware of all these different rules and which ones are optional and which ones are not?
Yeah, so I definitely keep updating it. That's because really for two reasons. One is that I'm learning more, so it gives me an opportunity to share more of what I know with my readers and my audience. But secondly, things are undeniably changing, getting more complicated. Email marketing is not a static channel. There's lots and lots of new things happening all the time. And so the updates definitely reflect that. So in terms of the rules, we have so many rules, and you're right. Some are kind of what I call must-follow rules, and the other ones are called recommended rules. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that email marketing has a lot of stakeholders. And you mentioned the law. So the government is probably the one that we kind of think about first. Here in the United States, that's probably the one that's the least important because we're still governed by CAN-SPAM for the most part. And CAN-SPAM is one of the loosest privacy and anti-spam laws among modern countries. So it's really weak. And I'm not a fan because I feel like it sets all the wrong expectations for businesses. If all you did was comply with CAN-SPAM, your email marketing program would be a disaster. You would be junked and blocked all over the place because you wouldn't be doing things right. So yes, the law is important. Here in the US, it's actually not so important. In other places, in Europe, you have GDPR, definitely firm rules there. In Canada, CASL. And you're right, you alluded to state laws, and certainly we have California's privacy law, which is a biggie. And increasingly, we have more and more state level laws. And I do think that that's ultimately going to cause people in Congress in Washington to finally update CAN-SPAM. It's going to take a little while before there's sort of a critical mass of different laws that will cause national brands to complain about how difficult it is to comply with laws in California, in Colorado, in Illinois, in Connecticut. At a certain point, it's going to get so complicated that they're going to have to come up with a new standard. I think it'll be a little while yet, but that's definitely going to happen. So that's sort of contingent, stakeholder number one is the government. But more importantly, especially here in the United States, is inbox providers. Inbox providers establish a lot of the rules that email marketers have to follow. And a lot of that is around permission and unsubscribes and, frankly, frequency and engagement. All of them really, really critical parts of an email marketing program are largely dictated by inbox providers and sort of secondarily by block list operators who also have a pretty strong say in how you manage your list, how you grow your list. Certainly some tactics that you shouldn't use if you don't want to get in trouble with block list operators. So those are a few so far. We haven't talked about subscribers yet. Subscribers, super, super important. They have lots of expectations. They like things a certain way. Now, of course, your particular audience could vary from the masses a little bit. So certainly testing becomes really important there when you're trying to serve your subscribers. But we do have a common email experience across, certainly across the country, right? There's certain things that we're used to seeing in our inbox, and those create, standards and expectations that really we should be paying a lot of attention to. I think there's a lot of talk about, trying to like break rules and stuff and try to stand out. And I think there's a lot of times when there's not really a whole lot of advantage to that. Sometimes there are, but a lot of times there's not. And then sort of the last big stakeholder, of course, is businesses, right? Like we do email marketing because we want to make money. We want to create more loyal customers. We want to retain customers, whatever your sort of business model is. You want to warm up leads, whatever it is, we're in business to make money, to be successful, and email marketing is a part of that too. So the reason why there's so many rules is because we have so many different stakeholders, and it's sort of this very complicated Venn diagram of trying to get all of these different things to line up so that we're meeting our business goals as businesses, but we're satisfying inbox providers, we're complying with the law, and we're making our subscribers happy. So in a nutshell, I mean, that's why there's just so many different rules.
And my only political comment today, and I do have a First Amendment right, my friends, to criticize public officials without any retribution. The Congress will get to that if they ever agree on anything and focus on things that actually matter. But I will leave it at that. Agree or disagree with me, I don't really care. Not you, chat, necessarily, but whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? So who knows if they ever get to any of that because they're so busy with other things. But the thing that I found so interesting, you said it's getting more and more complicated. And I think you were referring to all the different rules. But then we also have companies who make it really complicated just to get an email out the door, or like some approval processes, right? I mean, I've seen them all over the place. I mean, it's just like, that's complicated enough. And then you have to follow the rules, and then you have to follow the best practices, and then you have to do all these other things. What tips do you have to make it less complicated on all those different fronts? And because in my opinion, I mean, I know all this stuff works, just like content strategy works, content marketing works, writing a book works. I've seen it myself. But if you never get it out the door, it will not work. So how do you make it less complicated?
Yeah, so it certainly is very challenging. There's, again, lots of different, even internally, right? Lots of different stakeholders. And I think one of the biggest problems there is that you have like disconnects in understanding the challenge, understanding the channel challenges. And so one of the reasons why there's 2 volumes of this book is that there definitely is a little bit of overlap. And if you're an email marketing manager, I highly recommend you get both volumes. If you are an email marketing specialist, someone who's writing email copy or doing email design, volume 1 is probably going to be the one that you're happy with. Now, but if you're a CMO or a VP of marketing, someone kind of high up overlooking multiple channels, volume 2 is the one that's going to do the most work for you. And I think it's super important to talk to that audience because frankly, I talk to a lot of email marketers, you might be surprised, and they oftentimes bump heads with the CMO or with the head of marketing or with folks outside of the marketing department who really just don't understand how email marketing works. They don't understand all of the stakeholders. They don't understand what they can and can't do. They have a very low understanding of best practices, or maybe they come from direct marketing, direct mail, and they think that those are the kinds of practices that you can just port over to email, and you absolutely can't do that. So there's definitely a lot of misunderstandings. And that, I think, is at the root of a lot of the issues. We joke in the email marketing industry how a lot of higher ups just always want to send one more email as though it's like some super simple thing. With, oh, we'll just send one more email. And there's all kinds of consequences to that. And also a lot of production cost and time that takes, to get another email out the door. And so I think that's sort of the biggest misunderstanding, but you're absolutely right. You sort of hinted at like approval processes and sort of like, workflow in general. And I definitely talk about that in my books as well. That can definitely be a point of constraint. Yeah, if you have more than, a couple of people that are like part of that approval process, it's probably you're choking things off. You also should have rules about what kinds of things can change sort of last minute. Last minute changes are absolutely a recipe for mistakes. And I don't think anybody wants that. It creates a bad brand impression, bad subscriber experience. But when things are changed at the last minute, you ratchet up those risks really significantly. So there is a lot of stuff you can do in terms of that workflow and that process that can simplify things, but also recognizes, all of the different steps that have to take place in order to get an email out the door. At larger organizations, and here at Oracle Marketing Consulting, we work with a lot of really big brands, and they're not getting emails out the door, in a few days. Most of the time, their production process is a couple of weeks, sort of end to end, and it just recognizes the complexity of a big brand sending emails that are personalized, that are segmented, that have a lot of intelligence, built into them. It's not an easy thing to do.
I think sometimes people underestimate how long it actually takes to do something. So when oh, let's just write this blog post. I mean, I've been down that road many times, right? Oh, is the blog post done yet? And I know we can use AI, but as I said on the show the other day, I mean, if I have to read one more Unleash, I'm going to puke because, that's an AI term, right? I mean, AI has some of those terms. Unleash the power of email marketing. Like, I bet you 8 out of 10 times that's written by AI and not a person, because before AI came around, I've never seen that in any headlines or any subject lines. But when it comes to email marketing, when you talk about changing stuff late in the process, I was just thinking about that a little bit. It's like when you publish an article, right? I mean, I can update the article like all the time, after the fact. Like I just published something earlier and I was like, oh, this one sentence could have been better, or maybe not even better, but just different. And I changed it after the fact. But once the email goes out the door, the email goes out the door. So I guess that's the real difference here. It's like, it's like the old print days. Once you print the thing and it's in somebody's hands, nothing you can do.
There's a few like little tricks and things you can do, but you're right. In general, it's hard to change something once it's gone out the door.
Like what kind of tricks? Like how do you change an email after it goes out?
Well, so for instance, if your email is, pointing to various images, you can change that hosted image. That can change things. That's probably like the number one kind of like trick that you can use. So that's a nice little hack. There's a few other things that you can do, but that's probably the biggest one and sort of the most common one. But today, a lot of emails have lots of HTML text in them, as they should, because that's a better experience for subscribers. And that text can't be changed, but images can be switched.
Yeah, I mean, I hope people don't use images, because like sometimes I get these emails and I can't even read them because the images don't download until I click a button. So sometimes, depending what I'm doing, I won't. Now, when you talk about some of these rules, I mean, I'm just thinking about HubSpot or like Constant Contact, or I mean, even HubSpot tells me this is the right length for your pre-header text. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't even have to think, other than I have to fill this box, or like the footer, right? Like, I mean, Constant Contact doesn't even, or whatever, MailChimp, right? They don't even let you send stuff if you don't have all those boxes checked, right? It says you have to add your address and all this other stuff that's required. I mean, is that the way to keep track of some of those best practices, just to have the right software to send emails?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Email service providers will in some cases help you follow best practices or certainly comply with the law, which is part of what you're talking about with the footers. You're legally required to have that information in there. So yeah, they want to guide you so that you're not getting into trouble. A lot of email service providers will automatically authenticate your sending IP addresses and your sender domains using SPF and DKIM. That's really nice. So you're right that ESPs can definitely help you, comply, and certainly even in their composition functions, they can help you kind of guide you in the right direction. But for the most part, it's really critical for everyone to recognize that it's on marketers to make sure that they're following best practices. And certainly your ESP can be a partner. The platform can definitely give you nudges in the right direction. Some of these things are definitely kind of hard and fast. I think a lot of times when people talk about best practices, they hear optional. And it's true, some best practices are very fungible. They're very flexible. Some are not so much. So like authentication, right? That's absolutely best practices that you should be authenticating your sender IP addresses and your sender domains. And frankly, your other domains as well, you should be authenticating, even if you're not sending email via them, so that people don't spoof those domains and send emails from them against your reputation. So that's a best practice. There's no advantage to not following that rule. And there are a bunch of other rules that are exactly the same way, where there's really zero advantage and only downside to not following a best practice. But there are tons of other best practices, like you mentioned, subject lines and preview text. Strategies around there are more flexible. You should be exploring and testing and trying different things with your audience to figure out, hey, what works best for my particular audience. And I do take great care in my books to make it clear what exactly is the best practice and what is all the variety of ways in which you can execute on that. So I really try to stick to sort of foundational practices rather than getting too much in the weeds and too prescriptive, because a lot of executions change over time as you get new capabilities. Capabilities vary from ESP to ESP. There's also lots of third-party software and other things that can enhance your capabilities. So executions can change, but the principles, which is where I try to anchor email marketing rules, those don't tend to change as much. Now, new principles definitely come along. Things like Apple's mail privacy protection definitely caused me to add at least a couple of rules, maybe even 3, to better understand the impact of that. But in recent years, we've seen things like BME get added, CDPs have come along, of course, generative AI, lots and lots of new developments, schema, and on, lots of new things that are, some of which are not terribly optional, and some of them that are rather optional or will really vary depending on where your brand is at, what you can afford, what makes sense for you. So there really is sort of this spectrum, but I'm a big defendant of best practices, because again, I feel like they're rooted in all of those shareholders, and you can feel free to try to break rules, but most of the time, all you're doing is just going against what consumers expect, going against what inbox providers expect. But at the same time, certainly in the space of messaging and design and automation, there's all kinds of ways for you to express your brand and really get that across. I like to say that some people think that best practices lead to sameness. And I always like to remind them about cars. Cars all have 4 wheels, they have steering wheels, seats, windshields, and on and on and on and on. And we'd be hard pressed to say that every car is the same. They're not. They're very, very different. But, it's still a basic, somewhat standardized way of doing it because it works and people like it. So when you go against that too much, your car with 6 wheels is probably not going to be successful.
It's very interesting when you talk about those examples, because I think sometimes people just fight the wrong thing, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to follow this best practice because I have all this experience and I know how to do it, blah, 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 blah. And I think that's part of it, quite frankly, right? I mean, people just like you can be creative within the bounds of what works and what you should do. I mean, even when you think about SEO, like I'm a big believer, you got to check all those boxes, right? And you can totally be creative within those boxes. I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't. As I'm looking around over here on Amazon to see what people are clicking on, first of all, it is Chad's book. People are clicking on that. But while I was doing that, I want to share this with you really quickly. These sound panels that you can see behind me here, they're currently 25% off, $25.49. So make sure you check them out. So if you're wondering, well, how does Christoph sound so great? It's not natural at all. It's these sound panels behind me. I also got them on top of me. So I'm not quite in a sound booth, but as close as possible as you can be without having to spend an arm and a leg. So check them out if you want to. I know we're going to be running out of time here pretty quickly, but maybe in a minute, talk to us about subscribers. And I am so tired of people having a meeting with me, coming on my podcast, inviting me on their podcast, and that they think that means they can add me to their email list. How do we grow lists in a better way?
Sure. So I think what you're talking about is expectations, right? Just because you have someone's email address doesn't mean that they've opted in. And certainly, in Canada and in Europe, GDPR and CASL have very strict rules about what constitutes an opt-in. And here in the United States, we don't. Here in the United States, opt-out marketing is the law of the land. We saw very recently Experian getting in trouble for not having unsubscribe links. And that's really the main way that people get in trouble here in the US. You can really send email to anybody whose email address you get, and you're not going to get in trouble with the law so long as you're providing an unsubscribe link. But I think we all know that that's not how marketing should work, because it's not how consumers expect it to work. And as you pointed out, just because someone gets your email address doesn't mean that you're opting in to their promotional emails. So really, like, that permission part of things is really, really critical as a way to protect your sender reputation, with the various inbox providers. And one thing that maybe people don't recognize is that that sender reputation has changed considerably over the years. It used to be that your sender reputation was just attached to your IP address. And so if you got into trouble, you could change your IP address and kind of start anew. Today, your sender reputation is attached to your domain. So unless you are shutting down your website and getting a new URL, you cannot run away from a bad reputation.
Not going to happen to shut down a website, I would think, once you have it established. Really appreciate you coming on, Chad. Always learn so much from experts like you. Tell me really quickly, 10 seconds or 12 seconds, how do people connect with you? Who should reach out, etc.?
Sure. You can find me at emailmarketingrules.com. You'll find all my social links to the book, and lots more there.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. See you then.